Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB bringing you InBetweenIsode number 16. And so today, I didn't know if I was going to do this, but it's a sister episode of InBetweenIsode number 15, which had the Crimson Lotus Ji Nian Tuo. And this time, this is the Ji Nian Tuo, the Yuan Nian Tuo, I think is what it's called. But this week, I got the Ji Nian Tuo, which is the stands for memorial. And so in a lot of ways it's the sister tea to the tea that we had last time. And the tea that we had last time was really nice and had developed this kind of aged fruit, lychee, long on fruit sort of sweetness to it. And, I have not tasted this tea, so this is a rare blind tasting for me. And immediately I could tell that the tea was totally different. So I'm 2 steeps in already, and yeah, it's much different in the sense that it is much more aged biologically, and you could have fooled me that this is a tea much older than it actually is. All right. So one thing that I did want to touch on before I get going is to talk a little bit about the format of TeaDB. And one of the big limitations that it has, and I think this is really exacerbated for Pu'erh tea in particular, is it has a hard time just really capturing the sort of dynamic nature of tea steepings. Like in this episode, we'll probably do 2 steeps, maybe 3 if we're lucky. Even in Denny's episodes, which run quite a bit longer than mine, he's only getting 4 or 5. But a lot of these teas, especially the really good ones, are really, really dynamic and can shift in and out and go 15, 20 steeps, especially some of those aged teas. And so that's something that's, I guess, kind of a weakness of a TeaDB episode versus like an actual written form episode. And another thing that's really challenging about blind tastings, and this is something that Denny's much better at, or much braver at, I should say, is that it's a lot harder to come up with stuff on the spot to just sort of describe the flavor. So to avoid just talking pure nonsense, I've kind of avoided doing them. But because it is Tuesday, and I got to get this in between episode to you guys on Wednesday, and I had a bunch of notes that Glenn kindly sent me, we are going to do it anyways. All right. So the difference between this tea was what we originally thought was that the leaf grade is the primary difference. Last week's tea had much smaller leaves. And just looking at this, and I'll get you guys some close-ups at the end, is that the leaves are just much, much larger. And the other difference, and this is hard to say whether this has come through age or if this was originally the case, is that the compression is now different. I kind of speculated on the compression during the last episode, and so Glenn, kindly enough, took a look at a couple of the tools, and he said that the compression of the Ji Nian Tuo, what we're drinking now, the memorial tool, is indeed a little bit looser at this point than the Yuan Nian. So whether that means that they originally compressed into, had different, one was tight and one was loose, it's definitely hard to say, because over time, especially if you expose your tea to more humid stored conditions, it's going to loosen up much, much quicker than if you stored a tea in dry conditions like kunming or whatnot. And so just like the last tea, this was supposedly stored in Xishuangbanna and also grown in Xishuangbanna. So very similar in that regard, but totally different. As soon as I opened this up, I got a whiff of that sort of I don't want to say traditional storage because this wasn't traditionally stored, but more of the humidity and the wetness in the tea than the last tea, which I found to be generally extremely clean. This tea is not quite as clean, and I don't say that necessarily as a bad thing, more that it has just had a more accelerated aging process. All right. And, immediately after I did that, I wish that I had aired this tea out, as teas that have been exposed to kind of that more humidity or have reached that state tend to just improve a little bit from the airing out. So if you guys remember a while back, and I think it might have been my Origin Tea Bajang episode or my 1990s Hong Kong style from white to tea episode, I talked a little bit about that and showed you my setup for that. And so I think this tea would definitely be, if I were to buy a tool, it would be a big candidate. Alright, cheers. So there's still a little bit of wetness in the flavor. And what I sometimes find in these teas is if you brew it consecutively, so if I did like the third and the fourth brew at once, and I had a break before I did the third brew, sort of like now, the third brew is going to have a lot more of that wetness in there. So some of these more humid teas, if you just let them sit, even for 5-10 minutes, sometimes, so that just letting the leaves soak in that water or just having them wet will cause it to just perform a little bit differently. Some food for thought. So it kind of has that very wet, humidly stored, sort of vegetable-y earthiness to it. It's very, very sweet in a similar sense. And I expect this tea, which is quite a bit lighter. The last steep was much, much darker. And I did clean out my cha hai, so take that for what it's worth. So very, very smooth, a nice body. I find this tea to be extremely warming, extremely easy on the stomach. I just had lunch a little while ago, and so this is sitting really, really nicely with me at this point. So one tip for you guys when you're shopping for tools and stuff like that, especially some of these ones that are more compressed, and this is what I usually do, is for things that tend to be compressed, like iron cakes or tools, you want a bit of age on it. So what I will do is I will deliberately target teas that have been stored in Guangdong or Guangzhou, places that are more associated with humid storage versus Kunming storage. So if I was buying a Shaguan recipe from 2005, for instance, I would much rather have a tea that was stored in Guangdong rather than Kunming. Just a shopping tip for you guys. Excuse me. So it still has a little bit of that vegetalness, and I'm really curious, so I'm going to steep this a fifth time, and it looks like it's still going quite strong. It's not dying at all, just from the color of the liqueur, and we will... So a lot of that wetness is starting to go away, and it's starting to, there's always smooth, but it's starting to, some of that dankness is starting to pass through. So I think it's kind of hitting its stride a little bit more. In terms of mouth effects and stuff like that, there are some. I think similar to the last tea, this probably used pretty good grades, pretty good quality leaf. Similar to that tea, it's also from 2003, so it's from the earlier Changtai era, when in general is a good place to look if you just want better quality base material. And yeah, so big thanks to Brian again, who sent us these teas. I think I forgot to shout him out at the beginning of this episode, but without him, these episodes, In-Between-Isodes, would not have happened. So huge thanks to him for this unique opportunity to taste these two teas. I think, especially for learning purposes, these two are really, really fascinating. And, you know, I don't know the answer to whether this tea aged quicker simply because it was compressed looser or because the leaf grade is different. My intuition would lead me to believing that the compression caused the major difference, but I don't know. I haven't aged tea for hardly any time. So please comment. Let me know what you think of this episode, and thank you guys for watching. Cheers.